You guys know I love to use left-wing sources whenever I make an argument. And I'm going to start out this show by doing just that. The Atlantic is a left-wing publication. Very prominent, been around for a very long time. And I was struck by an article written by a woman named Angie Schmidt. Headline, Why I Soured on the Democrats. Subheadline, COVID school policies set me adrift from my tribe. Let me just read you part of it. She writes, until recently I was a loyal Democrat, left-leaning Democrat. That's redundant. She said, I've been an adult left-leaning Democrat all my life. She said she was the kind of partisan who hated Donald Trump so much that, quote, I struggled to be civil to the relatives on the other side of the aisle, close quote. Then she said, but because of what my family has gone through during this pandemic, I don't feel the same way. She said last summer, the Cleveland school system announced it would not open for in-person learning during the first 9 weeks of the semester. She said, I was distraught. My family, she says, relies on my income. I knew I wouldn't be able to work full-time because I had a then 5-year-old son, 3-year-old daughter at home. But I sucked it up. But she said about 30% of Cleveland families don't even have internet in their home before the pandemic. And she says, I kept hoping that somebody in the Democratic leadership would take a stand on behalf of Cleveland's 37,000 public school kids who are now suffering. As you know, I lived in Cleveland for 17 years, so this is particularly hitting close to home for moi. She said by spring semester, the data showed quite clearly that schools were not big coronavirus spreaders and their children were being hurt. She said the American Academy of Pediatrics began urging a return to in-school learning in June last year. June 2020. In February of last year, New York Times asked 175 pediatric disease experts, 86% recommended in-person school, even if no one had been vaccinated. Let me repeat that. February last year, New York Times surveyed 175 pediatric disease experts. 86% recommended in-person school, even if no one had been vaccinated. Under pressure, March 2021, under pressure from the Republican governor, Cleveland schools reopened, but they chose a hybrid model that meant her son could only enter the building 2 days a week. Then she writes this, and I'm quoting her, my husband and I had had enough. With about 2 months left in the academic year, we found a charter school that was open full-time in person. It was difficult, she says, to give up on public schools, but our trust was broken. She said what's worse is when she began talking about this to other Democrats, particularly online, got hammered, got called a Trump supporter. Welcome to my world, Twitter. She said Republicans have been guilty of politicizing the thing, so please, she didn't go that far. But she said research shows that good masks worn correctly can slow the spread, but it is silly to suggest they have no drawback, she said. And she said masks started taking on a symbolic performance, a symbolic importance. And then she said many liberals thought no one could fault them for being too cautious, especially when it came to children. She writes, quote, but I can and I do. And she quote a Oxford medical ethical professional who said we should be talking about proportionality, meaning that the intervention must be proportionate to the risk. And then she quoted a Bloomberg article in March of last year that found children in the U.S. were about 10 times as likely to be killed in a car crash as to contract COVID-19. I repeat, children in the U.S. were about 10 times as likely to be killed in a car crash as to be killed by COVID-19. And then she concludes with this. Little steps for little feet. Quote, none of this has shaken my support for the Democrat agenda, which I still endorse wholesale. Actually, you don't. You just now said you didn't. But I digress. Quote, what I've lost, she writes, is my trust that the party is truly motivated to act in the interest of those they claim to serve. Close quote. Yet you still endorse the Democratic agenda wholesale, although you've lost your trust that the party is motivated to act in the interests of those they claim to serve. Isn't that a little contradictory? As I said, little steps for little feet.